Horizon Zero Dawn gets a sequel. Insomniac is making a Miles Morales game, and the PlayStation 5 looks super weird. Here's our thoughts on Sony's big reveal. Hi there, I'm Chris Kohler, features editor at Kotaku, and I'm here with staff writer Ethan Gach. There is no E3 this week, but it doesn't matter to Sony because it did a big reveal for the PlayStation 5 anyway, showing off lots of games that are coming to its new console this year. Lots of familiar faces in there. Ethan, what you think?
It was not what I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was, defied those expectations. Obviously, this is a different year for everyone because of people being remote. But it was a lot of games, and then the PS5, which is not at all what I expected it to look like somehow.
Yeah, well, let's get into that. I mean, we already saw the Xbox Series X, which is this tall, sort of black monolith tower sort of thing, getting away from, typically what we've had for consoles in the recent past with, sort of a horizontally oriented, stackable sort of design. And now in comes the PlayStation 5, looking like something out of a 1960s vision of what the future was going to look like, with a very, just this weird kind of like rounded, non-rectangular sort of design on it. It's not something you're going to be able to stack other stuff on top of, or maybe even put on top of anything else. It's going to take a lot of visual attention.
Yeah, it sounds silly because they threw curves on it, and now everyone's like, whoa, what are you doing there? But it has strong vibes of like a 60s, 70s car that like the car manufacturer felt like they had to soup up the design somehow to make it flashy. And like, it's like, the Xbox Series X is interesting because at least they've been very vocal about how the design, the form factor was driven by trying to vent heat out of the top of it. So they had, it's oriented that way for a purpose. There's the vent on top. The PS5, we haven't gotten a closer look at how all of that will work, but it looks like there's a lot more there that are just sort of stylistic flourishes, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if there's a sort of mechanical purpose behind them, or if it just looks like that to be flashy.
Yeah, and no price. We don't know how much this incredible piece of 1960s futuristic glory is going to actually cost us to put in our house. But they did say, interestingly enough, that they're going the sort of Xbox One S all-digital edition route here, and they're doing a PlayStation 5 all-digital edition with no disc slot.
I still have some questions about how backwards compatibility will work. And, the question of like, if I can stick all of my PS4 discs into a PS5 and play them immediately, I would be, very much more interested in the disc version. But if that's not really the case, or you can transfer stuff digitally, I think now people are ready. Like, this was the console generation when earlier on people started to shift away and realized, like, I'm just going to download most of my games. And so now it feels like it's sort of an obvious decision to like go for the digital one.
Getting into the games at this point, because really that's what this was focused on. Not really a lot about the hardware or the OS, but really just the games. Horizon Forbidden West, the sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn.
I'm not sure if you're a big Horizon Zero Dawn fan or not. It'll be interesting to see when it actually releases, if it's like something that will come later this year or come next year. It would be probably one of the biggest launch titles Sony's had in a while if it was close to launch, or even a launch window. It would kind of be their Breath of the Wild.
The fact there was no release date put on it, though, suggests to me that no, it's not going to be something that launches with the PS5 this year. What is launching with the PS5 this year, though, is Spider-Man, Miles Morales, swapping in the new protagonist for this installment of Insomniac's now series of Spider-Man games.
Everything that is successful immediately becomes a series franchise. I think this one is surprising because I don't think people were expecting another Spider-Man game this soon. Especially it's still from Insomniac, so it's not like they gave this game, which may or may not be a spin-off or standalone, or it's not clear if it's supposed to be a direct sequel or sort of like an expansion of that story universe. But yeah, to deliver it, holiday 2020, that's 2 years basically after the last game came out, and that will be, they didn't say launch title, but assuming that's going to be the game that you get the PS5 for, and it's not available on PS4, that'll be a big one.
They said holiday 2020 for that one, so I would have to imagine that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a launch title, but it's close enough.
Yeah, and I think this will be I reviewed Spider-Man for us. I enjoyed it. I think it was held back in some ways from having to do the Peter Parker origin story in addition to everything else. So I'm really excited to see them be able to sort of just take on Miles Morales and do a sort of their own Spider-Man story. And because that character has a lot less baggage over he's only a decade old, so they have a lot more freedom in how they develop him.
And Insomniac not even stopping with Spider-Man Miles Morales, because they also revealed that they're doing Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, a brand new PlayStation 5 exclusive Ratchet and Clank game. And this was the game in which they chose to really talk about how it's going to be affected by the design of the PlayStation 5. It's a game about Ratchet jumping back and forth in between alternate dimensions. And so then that basically means that you can have, two, maybe even more totally different game environments that just load almost instantaneously as Ratchet jumps back and forth between dimensional rifts. And they also talked about, the PlayStation 5 is going to have ray tracing. Well, they're going to use ray tracing apparently on Clank to make his metallic body even more shiny and beautiful and reflective of the world around him. So that was Ratchet and Clank. Looks like it's going to be one of the first kind of like tech demos of the PlayStation 5 experience.
Yeah, I don't know how well they did of like emphasizing that in the presentation, but I think that's like the key. Because a lot of the games, my feeling at least was, these are all games I'm looking forward to. They're, these are, a lot of them looks, I'm assuming they're going to be exclusive. Obviously Spider-Man and Horizon Zero Dawn will be, but there wasn't a good idea of like what will be different on PS5 about these games that we played, the predecessors to on PS4. Whereas like Ratchet and Clank, it was like, okay, so this is what you can do with this sort of platformer on this new hardware. And that's, I think, more interesting.
So kind of a surprise also was Project ATHIA, ATHIA. It's by Luminous Productions, which is of course the division of Square Enix that made Final Fantasy 15, or that finished Final Fantasy 15. And this is it looks like it was just a sort of a brief trailer, but it looks very actiony. Maybe even it is an action game, maybe not an action RPG. I'm not actually sure. The lines between action games and RPG are so blurred these days anyway. But it is designed exclusively for PlayStation 5.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the, I obviously love, Final Fantasy, Square Enix, I'm excited for whatever they do next. And I think it was actually, it's hard to say what was gameplay and what wasn't in this presentation, but it looked like there were a set of there are moments in that trailer where you thought like, okay, this is what it'll feel like or be like when I'm actually playing the game. But I'm curious what you think about like, anytime Square Enix releases a working title, I get worried.
You get worried that what? Oh,
when it'll come? Yeah, like what?
When it'll come out? Oh, okay. I thought you were going to be worried that it was going to be titled like Project ATHIA divided by the square root of 556 minutes or something like that.
That could be the other thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yes, it has a working title. I wonder if this is one of those sort of Phantom Pain things where it's like Project ATHIA, but then later on they reveal it's actually called Final Fantasy 15 Project ATHIA or something like that. Maybe that might happen. But yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. Look, Square Enix, it looks beautiful, but I'm not going to hold my breath for the release of basically anything from Square Enix's Japan side at this point because, sometimes it takes them a while. Resident Evil 8. Apparently not called Resident Evil 8. Apparently it's called Resident Evil Village or possibly Village Resident Evil or something like that.
Yeah, Resident Evil Village maybe looks like Silent Hill. Like I'm not a big Resident Evil guy, but I got it made me more interested in what like the direction the series might be taking, like a little bit more reserved and sort of focused and less sort of it's been trying to get away from being a parody of itself recently, and Resident Evil 7 I think helped do that a lot, but this seemed like a sort of new direction.
Right, but definitely following in the Resident Evil 7 style of being first person. So, clearly wanting to keep exploring the first person Resident Evil idea and see where that goes. And finally, longtime Sony executive Shu Yoshida showed up to tell us all about something near and dear to his heart, which is a remaster of Demon's Souls. That is the original super hard medieval themed From Software action game that Sony famously passed on back in the day for PlayStation 3 in America and let Atlas publish it. Now Sony is back with Demon's Souls and it's being remastered. Well, I don't know about remastered. it's being redone in some way, shape, or form by the video game redoing experts at Blue Point Games, which have really made a name for themselves doing all kinds of remakes and remasters of classic games. So it's probably going to be pretty great.
The trailer, in the description for the official trailer, they say that it's an overhaul, it's remade basically from the ground up. They use the phrase from the ground up, and it'll have they didn't obviously say much, and the trailer was very vague, but they said there's going to have two modes, one where you can pump up the graphics, or one where you can focus on frame rate if you're worried about the action, the difficulty, the challenge. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see that game finally come back instead of just porting it or making it backwards compatible at some point or remastering it. They're just giving it the Bluehole Games treatment. I'm curious, you reviewed their remake of Shadow of the Colossus for us, whether like how you think they'll fare with that.
I have every confidence, I think, in looking at their past projects that this is going to do well. So beyond that, we don't have too much time left, but there were so many big announcements from big franchises. Gran Turismo 7, Hitman 3, Sackboy and Astro Bot are both getting new platform games. There were a whole lot of announcements here. Really, it's surprising to me, actually, Ethan, that Sony had initially pulled out of E3 back when there still was an E3. And because I feel like this would have been a phenomenal, live show to put together for people, just so many big hits.
Yeah, it's usually, you feel like, I guess, the sort of the year of transitioning to a next generation is full of games that are out there, like really cool tech demos for games that will look very different when they finally release 2 or 3 years later. But here, a lot of what they showed feel like stuff that's pretty close, right around the corner, and stuff that's of all different calibers. So not just like the Final Fantasy VII remake that who knows when it'll come out, but it was, which is, from a past conference, but like stuff like Sackboy, Astro Boy, like these sort of spin-off projects that will take less time and they can sort of, do interesting things with each one.
Sony, for this show, I think really drove the point home that they have the developers and they have the software. The PS5, the Xbox Series X, they're both coming out this holiday. They're really going to be competing for people. And one of the major advantages that you can have is exclusive software. And Microsoft is really just still at a point where, after having, closed down studios, after having canceled games in development, Microsoft is still kind of trying to make a comeback and buying studios and getting games going, so that it can have a lot of good exclusive Xbox Series X content, whereas Sony never stopped producing major exclusives, and now is going to sort of, it seems like Sony is really kind of, sticking its flag in the ground and saying, we're coming out, we're going to be there at launch with huge, major exclusives at launch, and then really in 2021.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, the big thing that Microsoft will always have to prove to me is, say for some god-awful reason the PS5 costs $600. It's if that's where the games still are, then that's I'll bite it and I'll do that, because Microsoft keeps harping on Halo Infinite coming out when the Xbox Series X launches. We still haven't seen much of that game, but I'm worried that if they don't have the sort of even a fraction of what Sony showed from first party to sort of back up that promise of like, well, even if I'm not getting the Sony games on Xbox Series X, I'm getting a different sort of exclusive experience. That's kind of still always the question, and I think Sony like reinforced like, hey, we still have all that stuff.
So, Ethan, even though this was the big reveal for PlayStation 5, we are still left with a lot of questions and unknowns about Sony's next console.
Yeah, so we finally know what it looks like, but we still don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know the actual launch date, the launch lineup, or anything really about how the console is going to work from a sort of user's perspective of what the system OS is going to be like, how saves and swapping between games will work. All of this sort of questions about usability and comfort and convenience that I think a lot of what feels like will be defining for the next generation. That's all stuff we still don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, at this point, both Microsoft and Sony, have serious advantages that they can call their own in the console war. I think that Microsoft, certainly having things like Xbox Game Pass, having the upcoming Project X Cloud, they're really kind of trying to redefine, I think, the relationship between you and your games in terms of where you play them, how you buy them, how you interact with them. Sony, which seems to have been a little bit more traditional, can certainly come out and say, we have the games, we have the studios, we have this great stable of first-party studios, and that's really what they showed today. Their big strength is these exclusive games you're only going to get on PlayStation 5. And certainly, I mean, we can say, having watched this show, Sony absolutely will have video games.